Hi everyone, can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to try today with no headphones. So if the sound is strange, just tell me, but yeah, with some tests, I think it should be the same as usual. All right, so today we finish chapter 11, then we start chapter, not 12, but the next one, I can't remember the number. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see if we get there. We should. All right. So we were talking about oligopoly and especially more, or rather monopolistic competition last time. So this is what we were discussing, the fact that contrary to perfect competition case, then the firm in monopolistic competition or in oligopoly for that matter faces a downward sloping demand curve and marginal revenue curve. So its behavior is going to be a bit different. But in the case of the monopolistic competition, we still assume that there are many, many firms on the market, so that you don't really need to think too much about how your own actions are going to influence your competitors. So what you're thinking is, okay, what's going to matter if I set my price or my production volume at a certain quantity? Well, it's going to rather increase my sales and decrease my price, or increase my price or decrease my sales. So what are you thinking? You're thinking about how consumers react to your own decisions, but you're not really thinking about how your competitors react to your own decision. This is because in monopolistic competition, we have assumed that we had many firms still on the market. So each firm has their own sort of little monopoly on their own specific product, but there are many of these small monopolies. So now what are we going to, and this is what we have realized we got. Today, what's the difference? The difference is that we are going to study the case in which we have few firms on the market. And this makes things slightly more, or rather more complicated. Why? Well, because now if you're some firm on the market and you decide to have certain production volume, then you're not only thinking, oh, how much are prices going to change if I increase my production, or rather how much my sales are going to change if I change my price. But you're also, in your mind, you have to think, oh, what are my competitors going to do in reaction to what I'm doing? Are they going to increase their production, decrease their production? If you're in a cartel, are they going to, so if you're in a cartel, in a way you have to all act together. But if you're in a oligopoly, you may still imagine that the others are cooperating with you, and if you deviate from your previous behavior, then they might retaliate by deviating as well. So it makes things from an analytical point of view much more complicated. So this is what's happening here. It's that oligopolists will end up exhibiting strategic behavior, so behavior designed to take into account the reaction of one's rivals, to one's own behavior. And so this strategic behavior is what has been developed into game theory, which we are going to talk a bit about. Have you heard that term before, or had it in at least one class before, or is that the first time? Game theory.
For me, it's the first time.
Yeah, okay. All right. So it's going to be a very shallow introduction, nothing to worry about. And so what you have to know is actually that game theory started with the study of oligopolies. So studying oligopolies and modeling how they behave and how they interact with each other was the sort of origin to the whole game theory science. And now it's been developed into many other disciplines in political science and in sports, of course, in games, because that's the whole point of having games. It's the fact that whatever you do, you have adversaries that are going to take what you do into account, or imagine what you could be doing and try to model or try to have the optimal behavior as a result of this. All right, so let's see what it looks like in the oligopoly case. So the firms, so if they're in a cartel, so they would just join together and produce the monopoly output. So that's what we call a cooperative output or collusive outcome. So what does that mean? That means that they would essentially say, oh, let's get together our 2, 3, or 4 big firms on the market, and let's just decide that we're going to produce as little as a monopoly would, and then just distribute the excess profit amongst ourselves. So that's very good for us, but not good for the economy as a whole. And the other thing that could happen is that this effort to coordinate with each other doesn't work, And in that case, we get a non-cooperative outcome. And so when do we get the cooperative outcome? When do we get the non-cooperative outcome? So to sort of predict this, we need some models. We need to use game theory to see what's going to happen. Yeah, so just to formalize a bit, what is game theory? Game theory is the theory that studies decision-making in situation in which one player anticipates the reaction of other players to their own action. That's not to say that there always is a reaction, because many of the games that we're going to see are actually games that are played simultaneously. They're a bit like rock, paper, scissors. So you cannot really, if you play rock, paper, scissors with somebody, you cannot really see, oh, that person played rock, let me play paper. No, you cannot react. But still, there is strategic behavior in the planning of the game. So you can know in advance, well, I'm not going to expect my partner to always play rock, for instance. Otherwise, it would be possible for me to always play paper and always win. So there is planning, or there is anticipation as to which strategy your adversary is playing. And that's going to be the same here. So we are not going to have a full-fledged game that goes on for a long time with many actions. It's going to be a simple game it's played simultaneously, but still there is a sort of strategic behavior. All right, so what is a game? So a game is is populated by players who have different actions that they can take. Or different strategies. So yeah, a game is populated by player, and they have different strategies, and as a result of the strategies played by all the players, then each player receives some payoff. Payoff is whatever you try to maximize. So if you're playing checkers, for instance, then the payoff is you win, you get 1 point, and you lose, you get 0 point, for instance. If it's a game of oligopoly, then you win by having the most profit, and you lose by having the least profit. Some games, some games are what we call zero-sum games, in which these are all the traditional games that you can imagine, like chess, or in which there is one player who wins and one player who loses. But in real life, you could have many games that are non-zero sum, meaning that you can find win-win situations. So situations in which both players could obtain a better score if they cooperated in some ways, or acted strategically, or get a worse score if they didn't. So game theory allows for anything, any kind of game you can imagine. So in the case of oligopoly, what we're going to see is the players are the firms. The game is played in the market, and their strategies are which price or which output do they decide to have, and the payoffs are their profits. So we're going to study the simple case of the duopoly. Why? Because it's good enough. So in economics, when we simplify things, it's not because we think that the world is simple. It's just that what we want is to synthesize the ideas into the simplest expression possible, so we can understand it. And here, a duopoly is the best, because duopoly is just an oligopoly with two firms. So it's a very simple, a very simple game in which you have only two players, and each player has to anticipate what the other player is doing. So you could imagine in real life, or in Canada or Quebec, it would be like Videotron against Bell. So you have two large players that have to somehow react to what the other is doing. And here we're going to say, as we were discussing, that you could have two different behavior or strategies that you could have. So we're going to say that you can either cooperate with your adversary or compete. Cooperate meaning that you, so imagine that Videotron and Bell agree that they're going to set prices high so that they want to extract as much income as possible from the consumers and not compete really with each other. Pretend that they're competing, but really they're not. They're just sitting on their market share, and so when a new customer comes and say, oh, but I think it's too expensive, could you make me a better deal? So then they're going to say, oh, well, yeah, I could make you a better deal, but yeah, I'm not going to. You can just go to go to Bell instead. But then Videotron would know, oh yeah, but actually Bell is charging as high as price as me, so I don't have to worry. And Bell clients would do the same, and they would go to Bell and say, oh, could you make me a better offer unless I leave? And they say, well, I don't have to, because the other firm is doing the same as me, so you're stuck. And basically it's exactly the same as if Bell and Videotron were just one big firm. And so what is the alternate strategy they could have is a strategy of competition. So they could imagine that, oh, my competitor is going to set a high price and imagine that I'm going to cooperate, but actually I'm going to betray my competitor, and instead I'm going to produce a large volume at lower price, and all of their clients would in fact come to me, so I'm going to seize all the market. So what is the best? Is it better to cooperate? Is it better to compete? So that's what we're going to see. So somebody has an idea of whether it's better to cooperate and to compete, just before we move on?
Well, for the two firms competing would be better because they'll make more money.
Are you sure that if they both compete, they're going to both make more money?
Oh, sorry, cooperate, sorry.
Yeah. It seems like it's best to cooperate, right? But imagine I know for sure that my competitor is going to try to cooperate by setting its price high. Then in that case, what's the best thing I could do?
Compete with him and then take all of his clients.
Yeah, exactly. So you see that there's a tension there, right? Problem is, if they both try to compete against each other, they're both worse off. So they would prefer cooperating. But the thing is, there's always this in the back of your mind idea that, oh, if I actually betray my partner, I'm going to win instantly. So,
but sir,
yeah, go ahead.
I thought if they were cooperating, then it would become a cartel, and that it is illegal. No, like, is there a line to, like, you can cooperate a little bit, but not too much?
Yeah. So the best you can do is to cooperate, but by masking it somehow. So making it difficult for authorities to establish that you're actually, yeah, exactly. So that's so you cannot say, oh, we're going to have this formal agreement that we're never going to be competing against each other. That's of course illegal. The thing is, it's difficult to establish that, oh, looking at what Bell is doing, I know for a fact as a government analyst that they chose to not compete. So how do you prove that? It's very difficult. So yeah, it's if you are an economist and you are trying to establish that some behavior or some industry is non-competitive, that's harder said, easier said than done. Yeah. All right, but we're going to come back to that. So this is what's going on. So let me make this a bit larger. All right, so I'm going to establish a bit what's going on there. So this is the normal form of a two-player one-shot or simultaneous game that we call. It's simultaneous because every player, so you have player one for his or what player one's from B or from A, who knows? Well, you have one player here, one player there, and they sort of don't really react to what the other person is, the other firm is doing. They just choose a strategy, but they can choose a strategy that they so they can choose either always cooperate, always compete, or they could also use something that we call mixed strategies. So mixed strategies are strategies in which you sometimes do one thing, sometimes do some other thing. So in that case, you're unpredictable. And so we're not going to analyze very deeply what's the best outcome, because it's you really have to get into the math of it. But we're just going to look at what happens if one does one and one does the other. So here, firm A can choose either cooperating and by producing 1/2 of the monopoly output, or competing by producing 2/3 of the monopoly output. So what we imagine here is that firm A and firm B are identical in size. So if they both produce 1/2 of what the monopoly would produce, then it's exactly as if this was a monopoly. But then, so this is cooperating. Then if I'm firm A, for instance, I could choose rather compete. And in that case, I would produce 2/3 of what the monopoly produces. So I'm going to try and attract some of the market of my opponent, hoping that my opponent has naively chosen cooperate. And so you see that this is one player, this is the other player. And these are strategy 1, strategy 2, and strategy 1, strategy 2. In that case, we see that everything is exactly symmetrical. So the two firms are exactly the same. And if one firm does this something and the other firm does the same, then they both get the same thing. Yes, Mr. Pineda has raised the hand.
I'm having a hard time understanding the difference between an oligopoly and the cartel, because I don't know, the way I see it is it's kind of like if they're competing in a way, it's kind of like in cartels when they're cheating, they're not, they're not producing the output that they're supposed to. So like I don't know, I don't envision it as clearly.
So there is no difference. It's we're sort of analyzing the same thing, but really going deeper into game theory. But you perfectly understand that it's exactly the same story. Here is the cartel solution, and here is the non-cartel solution in some ways. So here is what happens if the cartel is successful, and here is what happens if the cartel is not successful. Yeah, so we're on track with what your intuition says.
Okay.
All right. So then what are the payoffs? Well, the payoffs are here. So from A, payoffs are in light purple, and for firm B, they're in the darker purple cells. So you can see that if firm A cooperates and firm B cooperates, then they both get 20 million. If firm A decides to try and betray the other firm, then firm A is going to get more customers, and firm B is going to lose many customers because they're they won't like to pay a high price, or they're going to go to firm A instead. So firm A is going to get 22 million, and firm B is going to have much lower, 15 million. Rather, and if the opposite happens, if firm A decides to cooperate and firm B competes, then firm A has 15 million, firm B has 22 million. And if they both compete, then they both get 17 million. So looking at this game, what do you think will firm A do, and what do you think firm B will do?
I think both firms will compete because I don't think any firm will trust the other.
Exactly. That's a perfect. This is what so here they call this a Nash equilibrium, but it's stronger than this. Really is. I'm going to write it here. This is what we call a prisoner's dilemma game. So the only possible solution is compete, or non-cooperation. And this is a dominant strategy solution. So what do you mean by a dominant strategy solution? It means it's that a strategy is always the best, no matter what the other player is doing. So let's just look at firm A. So what you have to imagine is I'm firm A. I don't know for sure what firm B is going to do, but let me assume that firm B competes, or rather cooperates. What should I do? Well, if I cooperate myself, I'm going to get 20 million. But if I compete, I get 22. So I'm better off competing if firm B is cooperating. Then I can look at what if firm B, rather than cooperate, competes. Then I'm in trouble in that case. So I'm worse off than before. But I can still ask myself, should I be competing or cooperating in that case? I get 15 million if I cooperate, so I'm in the worst situation possible. I lose my clients. Or if I say, oh, well, you want to have a war, let's have a war, I'm going to compete too. At least I'm not as bad as before, I get 17 million. But what do you see? You see that, again, competing is the best strategy. So non-cooperation is what we call a dominant strategy solution. So that's the easiest form of equilibrium you can imagine, because it tells you for sure what each player is going to do. Now it looks like cartels in that case, or the cartel solution, shouldn't happen in real life. So we're going to discuss a bit why they might actually work later. But so this is so this is the outcome there. So dominant strategy solution. So the single strategy is better no matter what the adversary does. Right. But here they are talking about Nash equilibrium. So let me see what the Nash equilibrium is. So Nash equilibrium . So an outcome of the game. in which no player, or from which would like to deviate all right. And what is the Nash equilibrium in this game? Well, they say it here. It's 17 million. So we already know that this is the dominant strategy solution. So that's for sure they're going to play here. But still, it's also a Nash equilibrium. Why? Because if you look at here and you ask yourself, I'm firm A, I know that firm B is choosing to compete. Should I not should I cooperate? If I do, rather than 17 million, I get 15. Oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm happy here. So I'm not going to change on my own. So knowing that firm B is doing this. Now, what firm B asked them itself is the same thing. So I know that firm A is competing. Should I stop competing myself? Well, I get 17 million if I compete. I get 15 million if I do not compete. So I choose to stick with my initial strategy. So this compete is a Nash equilibrium. We've seen it's a dominant strategy, but it's also a Nash equilibrium. So you see the difference. The difference is you could have other outcomes in which if firm B was cooperating, maybe firm A would choose to cooperate as well and not deviate. But here it's, there's really only one solution. Yeah. So does that make sense? Is there a question about, so this is the crucial part of the class.
I have a question.
Hmm?
Is the Nash equilibrium and the dominant strategy always the same?
No, yeah. That's the thing. So for some reason, many times they explain Nash equilibrium rather than having dominant strategies. But so you could imagine a case in which in which compete would be a Nash equilibrium, and cooperate would be a Nash equilibrium, for instance. So so that's why we have the two notions. So dominant strategy is a stronger solution, because here I am sure that no matter what happens, I know for a fact that both are going to choose compete. Yeah, but in the case of Nash equilibria, there could be a lot of them. It could be that we both compete and we're happy with our strategy and don't want to deviate. But if we both did something different, then we would be happy to do that something different as well. Yeah. And by the way, so is that the best that the two firms could hope for or not? This outcome there, compete.
Well, no, if they both cooperate, they both make more money.
Yes, exactly. So that's the whole tragedy of this game, is that this is later on you're going to learn the notion of Pareto efficiency or Pareto outcome. So something that is Pareto efficient if some outcome of the world is Pareto efficient if it's impossible to make one person better off without making another person worse off. Well, here we know for a fact that compete is not Pareto efficient, because it's possible to make firm A better off by having firm A get 20 without making firm B worse off, because in fact firm B would be better off too with 20. So this would be a preferable outcome to this one. And actually, this would be Pareto efficient. But yeah, that's the nature of the world, is that they both decide to not cooperate, and that's very sad for them. But that's fine for customers, because yeah, for people, they like to have something that's closest as possible to perfect competition, and this is closer because you have a larger sales volume and lower price, so it's better for you and me in a way. All right, so that's the national, and yeah, now we're just going to redefine the terms. So national equilibrium, that result when each player is currently doing the best it can given the current behavior of all the other players. Oh, and by the way, so have you ever heard of that name Nash before? John Nash?
No.
Yeah, okay, so John Nash was certainly in the top 10 best mathematicians of the 20th century. He was extremely smart, but he didn't start as a mathematician. He started as so he died in a taxi accident about yeah, a bit less than 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, so he was crazy smart, but he started doing economics before mathematics, and so yeah, that's how he's most known to most people. But you would say that his mathematics research was much more advanced than his economics research. And anyways, what Nash showed is that, so let me go back to here. He showed that a Nash equilibrium, so an equilibrium in which people always people do the same and don't want to deviate, knowing the strategy of the other people, is an equilibrium that will be present in any game whatsoever. So it's his proof is extremely simple, but it's extremely powerful. And yeah, so he won he won the Nobel Prize for that. Yeah, in economics. All right. Yeah. So so this is just what we just were discussing so far. So compete is the Nash equilibrium. It's also the dominant strategy. Yeah. So as we were saying, the Nash equilibrium does not maximize joint profit, because here they would have a joint profit of 40 million, whereas here they just get 34 million. So they would be better off cooperating, but they do not cooperate. So that's the outcome, the prisoner's dilemma. So if you want to know what the prisoner's dilemma game is, so in a nutshell, the idea is the following: is two criminals are caught, but the policemen don't have enough proof that they really did it, so they put themselves in separate cells, and they say to each prisoner, you can, if you confess your crime, you get a very light sentence, but the other person is going to go to prison for a long time. If they both confess, then they both have a bad sentence, but not as bad as if you didn't confess. But if they both not confess, and if they both cooperate with their partner, then in that case they have a very light sentence because there isn't enough proof against them. So this is just a story that, so it's going to play out exactly the same. So cooperating for the two prisoners is better than non-cooperating, but it's always better to betray your partner, so competing. So the structure is exactly the same. So this is why we call this the prisoner's dilemma game, because the the outcome, the way the payoffs are, so the payoffs different rather than being profits, they are present sentences, but the whole story fits exactly the same mold, and the strategies are the same. So this is what the prisoner's dilemma is. So maybe you'll see it later on in your career. Yeah. Yeah, and as we said, so this is Pareto efficient, this is not. So the analysis of oligopoly started with started the game theory, the whole game theory discipline, but now it got generalized to many more settings. So one is how firms interact when they charge different prices for different differentiated products. So this is what we had been discussing earlier, when you can compete in a monopolistic competition fashion. But previously we have said, oh yeah, we have many firms, but what if you have a smaller number of firms that have differentiated products? So in that case, they would also have the same sort of analysis. So you could imagine that some firm wants to take over the market with their own sort of products. One other way would be to to enter a market or not. So you have to imagine, are they going to compete against me or not? So that's also a strategic behavior. And sometimes what you can imagine is that you want, if you're a large firm, you want to say to potential new entrants, oh, I'm going to fight you and not allow you to take over the market. So these are all strategic interactions that happen. Yeah, so in practice, so you can have cooperative behavior. So I said in the model you cannot, so there's only compete that's an equilibrium. So why would you so in actuality you can have collusions, and this may happen with or without an explicit agreement. So as we've said, an explicit agreement is illegal. So or rather it can be legal if you're like the OPEC countries, but within the country, it's usually illegal to do that. So you would have a covert collusion. Tacit collusion. So a good example of that would be what many people are suspecting. So gas prices. So sometimes there's, for no apparent reason, all of the gas prices everywhere starts to go up, and then you have to pay quite a lot more than usual, and you're like, why are they all doing this at the same time? So if you ask them, they're going to say, no, I didn't check anybody. I just felt like raising my price today. But for some reason, they all do it at the same time, because they know that if one is hiking the price, then you're just going to think, oh, I'm going to drive to the next corner over there and get my gas my gas there. It's cheaper. But if they all raise their price together, then it's best for them to do that. So that's a form of tacit collusion, because they don't really have to say, oh, let's call each other and decide what the price is going to be today. All they do is they watch each other, and if one is starting to increase their price, so they know that they're just going to match what they're doing. Yeah. So how do they reach this agreement? So one way to reach this situation would be the following. So this is a non-repeating Nash Prisoner's Dilemma game. It's a one-shot game. Why would we say that? Because in a way, once the game has been played, once firm B has chosen to do something and firm A has chosen to do something, then that's it. The game is finished, and whatever happened is the only thing that matters. But in real life, what happens is, well, then there is the next day or the next week or the next month. So in a way, you don't get to play this game only once. So this is going a bit further, but yeah, one solution to the non-cooperation is to realize that the prisoners dilemma game may be repeated. So then what can you do? Well, you may think, oh, I'm going to actually cooperate today because I have a good feeling that if I cooperate and the other is cooperating, then we get a quite good payoff today. And tomorrow that my partner is also going to cooperate with me. So we can go on and cooperate. But if I start cheating, what is the other firm is going to do? Well, the other firm is going to say, oh, you want to compete against me? Well, let's go ahead and actually compete. So you see that this is over time, it's not worth it for anybody to try and steal the other people's market shares, because then they're going to react. So if, for instance, Videotron tries to steal the Bell's clients, and Bell was setting a high price, well, what is Bell going to do in reaction? They're of course going to lower their price because they don't want to lose their clients. So this is the whole dynamic thing that is going on. So if the prisoner's dilemma game is repeated, then it can give rise to cooperation, and this is a whole other aspect of game theory that's very interesting. But yeah, we're not going to go into there. But that's how you get cooperation. Yeah. So if you don't get cooperation, what do you get? So you compete actively. So that's. Well, it could be the same as say another situation would be drug wars. So if two gangs are sharing the city for their drug clients, they each have their territory. So in some instances, then everybody's happy, and so they're all saying they're drunk and everything is fine. But then if one drug group tries to take over the other group's territory, then they may get a war, and in that case, everybody goes to war. So you can see that this situation of the prisoner's dilemma game happens all the time in many situations. So in that case, then the two of them are going to compete. And the consumers would be happy with this competition. That's what we hope for. We don't go, so not in the case of drug wars, we don't hope that there is drug wars. All right. Do we? All right, so another way to prevent other people from fighting you So it's to create entry barriers. So here we're shifting gears. We're looking at some other way in which you can prevent your competitor from competing against you. So one is to create a lot of different brands, or so a good example of that would be two things. So here they say that you can have essentially one brand that creates many different products. But yeah, I would be more precise than that. So two possibilities. So create one line of product for each small segment of the market. So example of that would be airlines, like big airlines. Which have their own low-cost alternative. So when low-cost alternative appear, then you say, oh, I don't want to lose market share to them, so I'm going to create my low-cost alternative, which is a direct competition to their low-cost alternative.
And so that always fails.
Yeah, it doesn't work too well, but it can. Or in the case you would have Bell Videotron. Have their flagship offer, but also competing, quote unquote, less costly alternative, like Fizz or I don't know the others, but other. So it looks like, oh, there's a lot of competition in the market, but actually, if you look more closely, they're all owned by the same people. So in a way, if you were really in trouble, then it would be possible to just make Fizz worse, so that Bell or Videotron don't lose all that much of their market share. And the second way to do it, that also sort of works or sort of doesn't work, is buying emerging competition. Example, Facebook buying WhatsApp, Google Maps buying Waze, etc. So this happens all the time. By the way, you guys know about Waze? It's an awesome app that you should download if you drive a lot. So it gives you traffic information and all of these things. So much better than just Google Maps per se. So I'm curious. So the person who said it doesn't work, why would you say it doesn't work? Because I don't have a, I'm not an expert in competition theory, but my my sense is that if they all do it, then in somehow it must be that it's an efficient way of not facing real competition. No? Or yeah, one thing I could add to is starting their electric model. But this, I agree, it's to compete against Tesla. But in that case, I agree that yeah, some of them are sort of good, some of them are not so good. So no, so why isn't that good? Okay, all right. Let's move on. Yeah. Another way of having a barrier to entry to limit competition is to have heavy advertising. So in that case, then since everybody knows something, then it sort of makes it as the go-to brand. So it's very hard for new brands to get known if everybody knows the. So this is true for yeah, a good. Yes. Yeah, so this is this is good for well, it's hard for me to say because in a way, if you are so in some sectors there are many strong advertisers. So like in the car industry, for instance, if you don't have a super large advertising campaign for your car, it's very hard to make headway. And then the thing is, then we don't really know if there are other smaller players which do not advertise that all that much because we don't see them. But the problem with that is advertising is very costly. So so it eats up a big chunk of your profits. So you want to advertise to make sure that you keep your position as a big player that can have a markup on the marginal cost. So to have pure profits, but this is a big chunk of your, and for some firms, it's actually the biggest part of their budget is advertisement. So when you buy their product, you're essentially paying for seeing their ads yeah, on TV or elsewhere. And the other other problem is so still there can be other ways to know about something. So word of mouth, influencers, lots of different ways. So you may try and keep your strategic position, but it's not all that easy to keep it. Predatory pricing. So this is when you, yeah, so when you you make possible and a new firm incumbent. Yeah, new firms believe that you will compete harshly against them. By setting a price below a marginal cost. So why would you set your price below marginal cost? It sounds suicidal to do that, because what happens is you just lose money and lose money and lose money. Well, yes, but if you do that, so the other people cannot enter the market. So, and when the threat of competition is gone, or you can do that to just drive out some old firm from the market completely. And when they're away, then you start raising price again. So I'm sure you have seen that happen a few times.
Sir, isn't that illegal?
Again, that's it's hard to prove, but yeah, I think in many circumstances it is. Not sure about Canadian law exactly, but yes, if you can show that some firm is selling below marginal cost, then yes, that would be yeah. Yeah, so this is just so some firms close to profit maximization in the short run. They come close to achieving competition. Yeah, so this is just a summary of what happens, what we've been discussing so far. Yeah, so you can read it on your own. So again, this is not so clear. So some economists argue that oligopoly leads to more innovation. Why? Because it allows you to. So if you want to keep your strong position on the market, then you're better off innovating to stay better. And the best way to do that, so best way to stay on top is yeah, or maybe so surpassing your previous product. So you're not saying, oh, buy my product, it's better than my competitors. What you're saying is, I have the best product, but still I'm innovating, and let me introduce an even better product than the last one. So there's just no way for anybody to catch up with me. So a firm like, let's say Tesla is a bit in this situation, in the sense that they still make their car better and better and better each year. And it's very hard for other car manufacturers to catch up with them. So they are, in some ways, they have some sales volume for electric cars, but yeah, in terms of quality, it's very hard for them to catch up to them. So that's the best thing you can do. Or if you're, I don't know, Brown razors, maybe, but yeah, razors, they have a lot of competitions too. But if you say, oh, we had 4 blades and it was the best thing, but now we're introducing 5 blades and then 6 blades and 7 blades. So it's like you're on top and you can't catch us, so whatever you try. So that's the best situation you can have. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so one important thing here to note is the challenge for public policy to keep oligopolists competing rather than colluding. And again, this is difficult so competition competition theory and competition policy is a difficult subject, because if you're an economist and you're asked to go to court and say, oh yes, I can attest that Microsoft is not a monopoly because they have competitors, or Google is not a monopoly because they have competitors, then it's just you get paid a lot of money to do that, because it saves these big companies lots and lots of money. Otherwise, they would have to split up, for instance. But it's very difficult to show so in Europe they have been most successful, and so a good example of that is we've talked a bit about this. It's telecommunication. In Europe is much more competitive than in North America. Especially Canada. So how did they achieve that? Well, they said we're not going to tolerate uncompetitive behavior, and all of the big previous companies that had a monopoly for distributing telephone, for instance, that now they have to compete against the others, and they cannot have a competitive advantage. So in North America, what happens? So oftentimes what you find is that distributors so divide territories and do not compete. Against each other. Similar with airlines. So it's nice to have 10 different airlines in North America, but if for from one destination to another you only have one, then is there competition? No, because as a consumer, I cannot choose which airline to pick. There's only one in one direction. So they're a monopoly in that almost in that on that rule, basically. So that's why it's very easy to them to at some point, and they don't even have to do it expressly. They can just it just happens that they, for instance, in terms of telecommunications, they can just buy back some local telecommunication firms, and then they get a sort of monopoly in one region, and then the clients, they have to pay this high cost. All right. So questions about this? So if you want to go oh, there's one discussion. So my answer is always the same. It's written in the outline. Oh yeah, chapter 6 to 10. All right. So what time is it? Yeah, we have 5 minutes, so we can start discussing a bit the next chapter. Next chapter is much lighter, so it's about market efficiency in general, and there's a lot. It's a bit like this one. There's a lot of text and not a lot of analysis. So this is going to be a higher discussion about why are market efficient, why are market economies better at distributing and producing goods and services compared to others, and what can lead to market failure, and what requires government intervention. So it's, in some ways, it's going to be linked to what we've been discussing in many other chapters. Yeah, so this is the plan. So yeah. So first of all, why would the government have a monopoly on violence? So basically control the police, control the army. Why is that important for the economy in general? Then the case for free market. So why do free market work as well as they work? I know that many people think they don't work well, but actually then ask yourself, would you like to go to some other place where there is no free market? Actually, around the world, it's even hard now to imagine some place with no free markets. Maybe North Korea has his plan, but we don't really know what's happening in North Korea, so it's hard to know how things are going there. But even places like Cuba or China, they have free market for the most part. It's just there's various degrees of state control, but the underlying way in which people interact is pretty much the same. So USSR, back in when they had their communist revolution, it's really completely disappeared right now. But criticism is valid. Why? Because we have market failures. We're going to discuss a bit about them. Then social goals. What should we do about them to reach to reach an adequate situation? And why is probably what's happening in Europe or Canada sort of the desirable way of doing things, according to many economists, or the US? Yeah, and identify why governments would intervene. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the first aspect before we go. So we've said that, we have a perfect competition in which there's no state intervention. Well, is that true? Well, that's true in the small models that we've been studying, in which we say if there's no, say, a price ceiling, price floor, or no tax, or no quota, then it means no intervention. But of course, the state is still there. Markets still exist in some in some institutional settings. So yeah, that's what I would say. So markets, yeah, free markets always exist in some institutional setting. Otherwise, it would be the Wild West, maybe, or so it's anarchy basically. And was the Wild West a good place to be? Well, it's a good place if you want really nobody to bother you and to be able to do whatever you like. But if you want security and protection and being able to freely have a freely start a new firm, start a new company, then having some sort of police is very good. And by the way, it's a place in which you don't have that. So if you don't have, so if the government doesn't have a monopoly on violence, then you wouldn't say this is a stable situation. Why? So I'm just going to say, yeah, no monopoly on violence. Not a stable outcome. So let me give you an example. So in the medieval time, you would have warriors or kings, yeah, or small or local rulers would fight for the control of some piece of land, so they could tax it. So it's impossible to have just people living there with no protection, no problem, because it means they're open to being invaded by anybody. So they move. And example in modern times, the mafia, or the mafia in the US, or you could also say narcos in Mexico. So what happens there? In both cases, there was a police force and military there in say New York or in Mexico nowadays. It's just that what happens? Well, the mafia or the drug dealers or the narco traffickants in Mexico, they have so much money and power that essentially they govern the place. They can they just bribe officials, so then they do whatever they like, and they control whatever happens there. And so in the case of the mafia, what they would say is, oh, it's a nice shop you have there. It would be sad if something bad happened to it. So I suggest you just pay me to make sure that nothing happens there. So what's the mafia saying? It's saying, oh, I'm the new police in charge. So if there's something wrong with your shop, then you come to me. And by the way, if you don't pay me, then maybe it's my brother-in-law that does something bad to your shop, but of course they don't say that explicitly. This is all to say that monopoly on violence is a natural state of affair. It's and if you don't have that, then you really have anarchy. You have failed states, and nothing good can come out of it. All right, so I'm going to stop here for now. And yeah, if you have questions before the next midterm, just come to office hours. I'll answer them. All right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is the second midterm the same format as the first midterm? Like we have 75 minutes to answer 50 multiple choice questions.
Yeah.
It's on Moodle.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And next class, we're gonna continue this chapter, or we're gonna do a review of the other chapters.
Yeah, I'm not done. This is slide number 1. So yes, we have 30 slides for that. So. All right, so have a nice day and good luck with everything.